and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing we call it advanced writing, okay? And we're specifically going to be focusing on grade 8. So grade 8 advanced writing. So it's actually for high school, but the content that we are basically focusing on is grade 8. So we are doing advanced writing, right? So we're doing our grade 8 English advanced writing lesson on subject and predicate. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. All right, so we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca, and then you're going to scroll down up until you get to language arts and then grade 8. Once you get to grade 8 or the to the grade 8, then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of subject and predicate. So we're going to find out what a subject is, and we're going to find out what a predicate is. So our chapter that we are focusing on is subject and predicate. The subject is English language arts. And the grade that we are focusing on is grade 8 advanced writing. The lessons that we are going to be focusing on under the chapter of subject and predicate is to identify the complete subject or the complete predicate. In a sentence, and then we're also going to identify the simple subject or simple predicate within a sentence. And also we're going to identify, lastly, the compound subject and compound predicate within a sentence. So that is going to be our lessons for today under our chapter of subject and predicate. So basically, with every sentence, right? Or let's say every sentence, it has a complete subject and it has a complete predicate. So every sentence has a complete subject and it has a complete predicate. It's like saying it has a noun and it has a verb. And the complete subject, it tells us who or what is doing something. So complete subject, it tells us who or what is doing something. And with a complete subject, right, it is the simple subject plus any other words that describe or modify it. That is basically a complete subject. It is the simple subject plus any other words that describe it or that even modifies it. For example, she sleeps late on the weekends. So she sleeps late on the weekends. And if we were to identify our complete subject, I think we can first say it is she, right? So she is the subject that tells us who or what is doing something. All right, so we said that she is the complete subject already, right? And it tells us who or what is doing something. Or we can even say her best friend. That can also be a subject. So we can even say her best friend, right? And that basically states a subject or tells us that it is a subject. So we said our subject is her best friend. Within that sentence of her best friend sleeps late on the weekend. All right. So we said that let's say a complete sentence has a complete subject and a complete sentence has a complete predicate, right? And a complete subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, and it is a simple subject plus any other words that describes or modify it. And we made an example of she sleeps late on a weekend, or we have her best friend sleeps late on a weekend. So her best friend over here is her subject, who is the subject. And the complete subject, it tells us who sleeps late on the weekend. Example, she as well as her best friend. They sleep late on a weekend. Now we're going on to a complete predicate. And a complete predicate, it tells what the subject is doing. So we said the complete predicate, it tells you what the subject is doing. It's basically like the action. It's like saying the verb, right? And it is a simple predicate plus any other words that describe or modify it. For example, her best friend sleeps. So if we were to identify, let's say the predicate, then we would say it sleeps. And then we have another example, which is her best friend sleeps late on a weekend or on the weekend. So which means that sleeps late on the weekend. That is the whole, let's say, predicate, because it says it is the simple predicate, which is sleeps, plus any other words that describes or modify it. And sleeps, it tells us what the bodyguard, what the best friend does. All right. So we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So let us go to aplusstudents.ca. And before we go, we said that every sentence has a complete subject and it has a complete predicate, right? With a subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, whereas with a predicate, right, it tells us what the subject is doing, and it is the simple predicate plus any other words that describes or modify it. All right. And remember, even when you are writing, before we go on to our tutorial, so even when you are writing, remember we said that a sentence has a complete subject and a complete predicate, right? Which means that if you are writing, then you need to also know how to formulate or to write a specific subject. And you must know that within a sentence, there needs to be a predicate. So now let's go to our tutorial, and we're going to go into the first lesson of identify the complete subject or complete predicate of a sentence. And we see that every sentence has a complete subject as well as a complete predicate, right? And we made examples of that earlier, where we see that a complete subject, it tells us who or what is doing something. And it is a simple subject plus any other words that basically describe or modifies it. So, for example, she sleeps late on a weekend. She sleeps late on a weekend, right? Which means that if we were to identify the subject, it would be she. And remember, we said that a subject, right? It tells us what someone is doing, and it's a simple subject, which is like she, plus any other word that describes modified, and this is her best friend. Then we also have a complete predicate, like we mentioned earlier on, and it tells us what the subject is doing, and it's a simple predicate plus any other words it describes or modifies it. All right. So here it says we need to select the three words that make up the complete subject. Three words that make up the complete subject. It says, my fearless friend flies down the ramp on a skateboard. So if we need to select three words, right? Remember then it means that it is the subject plus the other words that modifies or describes it, right? So, my fearless friend flies down the ramp on her skateboard. So, which means that my fearless friend. And that is the three words that make up the complete subject. So, my fearless friend is the subject. So, we need to select five words that make up the complete predicate, right? And remember, we said a predicate, it tells us what the subject is doing, plus any other words that describes or modifies it. So we need to select five words that make up the complete predicate. So what do you think are the five words to make up the predicate? The sentence is Paco and Daniel waved from across the room. All right, and if we select the predicate, right, and let's say the five words, then it is waved from across the room. That's one, two, three, four, five words. Waved from across the room. So we selected the five words that makes up the predicate. Now we need to select, where are we now? We need to select two words that make up the complete subject. The subject. And it tells us, the subject tells us who or what is doing something. All right, so we need to select the two words that make up the complete subject. It says dedicated volunteers remove litter from the beach. So dedicated volunteers. So it's like asking yourself, who removed the litter from the beach? So they want us to use or select two words that make up the complete subject. And if we use the two words to make up the complete subject, and then we will choose dedicated volunteers. And that is the two words. So dedicated volunteers, they remove litter from the beach. All right. All right. Remember we said that the subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, right? It can be one word or it can be more than one word to either show or describe or modify that specific subject. So now we're going on to a test where we're going to identify the complete subject or the complete predicate of the sentence. And the predicate, it shows who is doing the action. So we need to select 5 words that make up the complete predicate. So we need to select the 5 words that make up the complete predicate. Is it waved from across the room or Paco and Danila waved from? So is it waved from across the room or Paco and Danila waved from? All right, so if we select the 5 words that make up the complete sentence, we will say waved from across the room, and that is the predicate. It's like waved is the simple predicate or the simple verb, but all the other words that basically tell us about the subject, we basically need to underline. We need to select 5 words that make up a complete predicate. 5 words that make up a complete predicate. Is it can jump 7 inches high or fleas can jump 7 inches? So the sentence verse is fleas can jump 7 inches high. So we need to select the complete subject, the complete predicate, and select 5 words that make up the complete predicate. Is it can jump 7 inches high? Or fleas can jump 7 inches? All right, so we will go with can jump 7 inches high. So we need to select the 2 words that make up the complete sentence. The director creates suspense from haunting music. So the director creates suspense from listening. Where are we? Suspense with haunting music. So with haunting music. So the director creates suspense with haunting music. So is the 2 words that make up the subject, is it the director or haunting music? The director or haunting music? And if we select the 2 words that make up the complete subject, we will say it is the director. And that is our subject. We need to select 2 words that make up a complete subject. It says, dedicated volunteers remove litter from the beach. So is it dedicated volunteers or is it the beach? We need to select the 2 words that make up the subject. A complete subject. And if we select the 2 words that make up a complete subject, we will choose dedicated volunteers, right? Because we're not just saying volunteers, we are putting emphasis on dedicated volunteers. And that is correct. Let's do one more. We need to select two words that make up the complete subject. Two skiers crisscross the snowy hill. So two skiers crisscross the snowy hill. Is it two skiers or is it snowy hill? So we need to select the two words that make up the complete subject. Who or what is doing something? Two skiers or snowy hill. All right, so if we select the two words, and then we're going to say it's two skiers. It's like two people doing the action. All right. So now we're going on to our next lesson, which is to identify the simple subject or simple predicate of a sentence. So we're going to identify the simple subject and we're going to identify the simple predicate within the sentence. All right, so remember we said that a simple subject, right? It tells who or what is doing something. And with each subject, right? With each sentence, we have a subject and we have a predicate. The subject, like we said, it tells us who or what is doing something, right? It's basically like the noun, right? So with the simple subject, it is just a simple or it's just a subject noun or pronoun without any other words to describe or modify it. So within our previous lesson, right, we made mention of a subject and a predicate, right? And we say the subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, right? And then we also need to identify, it can be either more one, it can either be, let's say, one word, or it can be more than one word to describe or to modify the subject, right? But a simple subject, it tells us who or what is doing something, and it is just the subject noun, or it is just the pronoun without any other words that describes or modifies it. For example, Jennifer sleeps late on a weekend, right? Which means that just Jennifer is our subject noun, or it is our subject, right? No other words that describes or modifies it. Only Jennifer, for example. Only the noun. Her best friend sleeps late on weekends, right? Which means that we will say the friend is the noun or the pronoun over there. And then Mrs. Peterson sleeps late on the weekend, which means that it is Mrs. Peterson that sleeps late on a weekend. So Mrs. Peterson is our subject. Then a simple subject, right? In this case, it tells us who sleeps late on the weekend. Then we have the simple predicate, right? Remember we said in our previous lesson that a predicate, it tells us what the subject is doing, right? And also any other words that describes or modifies it. But when it comes to a simple predicate, right? A simple predicate tells you what the subject is doing, but it is just the verb without any other words that describes or modifies it. Because in our previous lesson, when we identified the predicate, we sometimes identified the verb plus any other 5 4 words that basically modifies or describes it. But in this case, it is only the verb that you need to identify for a simple predicate. For example, her best friend sleeps, right? So which means that in this case, our verb, if we identify our verb, then it is sleeps. Because sleeps is the verb. Sleeps is the verb. And then once again, her best friend sleeps late on a weekend, right? So with a predicate, we would have selected sleeps late on the weekends. However, with a simple predicate, we're only selecting sleeps, only the verb, without all the other words that describes or modifies it. So in this case, a simple predicate, it tells what the best friend does, and the best friend sleeps. So now we need to know the difference between just a simple predicate, simple subject, as well as subject or predicate. When it comes to the subject and it comes to a predicate, right? And then it tells us either who or what is doing something. It also tells us what the subject is doing, plus all the other words that describes or modifies either the subject or the predicate. But when it comes to a simple subject or a simple predicate, right? And then we do not add any other words to describe or to modify it. With the subject, we only stick to the noun or the pronoun, and with the predicate, we only identify the verb. We do not add any other words to describe or to modify our subject as well as our predicate. All right, so now we're going to select the simple subject, right, within our sentence. A monstrous storm was brewing in the Gulf. A monstrous storm was brewing in the Gulf. What is the simple subject within that sentence? A monstrous storm was brewing in the Gulf. So we need to select the simple subject. And if we select the simple subject, then we will say storm, right? Because storm is our noun, and monstrous, it basically describes the noun. So storm is our noun. And like we say, a monstrous, it's describing the noun. So we're only sticking to the one word. For the subject, only the noun or pronoun, and for the predicate, only the verb. We need to select the simple predicate. The crowded passenger train stopped. So the crowded passenger train stopped. So if we select the simple predicate, What is a simple predicate, or what is the verb that we need to identify within this sentence? All right, so if we select the verb or we select the predicate within the sentence, and then we will say stopped. So stopped is the action that the train did. It stopped. So we need to select the simple predicate, right? He circled his favorite line of the poem. So he circled his favorite line of the poem. What is the predicate, or what is the verb that we can identify within the sentence? So he circled his favorite line of the poem. And if we select the simple predicate, we're going to say circled. Right? So circled is our simple predicate. Because circle is the verb or it is the action. All right, so now we're going on to our test, right? We need to select the simple subject. Her favorite pastime surprises most people. So the simple subject, is it pastime or people? So her favorite pastime surprises people or most people. So we need to select our subject, simple subject. So is it pastime or is it people? And if we select a simple subject, then we can say it's people. Because people is, oh, pastime. Her favorite pastime. Okay. So pastime is our simple subject. Okay. All right. We need to select the simple predicate. He circled his favorite line of the poem. So he circled his favorite line of the poem. Is it circled or is it poem? He circled his favorite line of the poem. We need to select the predicate, just the verb, the action, circled or poem. All right, then if we select the simple predicate and then we will say it's circled. Right? Circled is our predicate. It's the action. Her best friend moved away last summer. We need to select the simple subject. Is it summer or is it friend? Summer or friend? We need to select the simple subject. So summer or friend. And if we select our subject, we can say it is the friend, right? Her best friend. Friend is our simple subject. We need to select the simple subject. Golden honey oozed from the overturned bottle. So golden honey oozed from the overturned bottle. Is it honey, which is our simple subject, or is it bottle? So honey or bottle. All right, so if we select the simple subject, then we can say honey. So what kind of honey? Golden honey. Oozed from the bottle, overturned bottle. We need to select the subject. Rick pruned the rose bushes in Mrs. Garrison's garden. So Rick pruned the rose bushes in Mrs. Garrison's garden. Is it Rick, which is the subject, or garden? Rick or garden? And if we select the subject within the sentence, we will say Rick. He was the one that pruned the rose bushes in Mrs. Garrison's garden. All right, so let's do the last one. We need to select the simple subject. The narrator speaks in a low voice. So the narrator speaks in a low voice. So is it narrator or is it voice? And if we select the simple subject, we can say narrator speaks in a low voice. All right, so that is it for subject and predicate, right? So we said a complete subject and a complete predicate, right? A subject, it tells us who or what is doing something. And with a complete subject, right? It can be who or what is doing something, plus all the other words that basically modifies or describes the subject. And with a complete predicate, right, it tells us the action that is being done, right? Plus all the other words that describes or modifies it. But then when we have a simple subject or a simple predicate, right? Simple subject is basically, it tells us who or what is doing something, but it's only the noun or it can be the pronoun without all the other words that modifies or describes it, right? And the same with the simple predicate, right? It tells us the action, right? So it's only the verb without the other words that describes or um, modifies it. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on subject and predicate under our advanced writing grade 8 lesson. So thank you very much, grade 8s or high school learners, for joining our class. And I really hope you're going to have a good day further. Goodbye.